The moment that she said bilateral breast cancer, I was done. The longer they were there, the harder I just cried because nothing was happening. To love, I said, so no matter what your will is, I accept. And the moment I accept left my lips, like a palm width beam of power came from that small hand on the left side of my back, beelined through my torso, split, hovered on both breast lumps, and stayed there for songs.
Hi, Marlene. Welcome to part 2. For the people who are watching, if you haven't seen part 1, please go watch part 1. In there we discuss her near-death experience at 8 years old. Now we're going to discuss the things that have happened in her life since then, in her adult life. So, Marlene, welcome.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so could you explain some things that have happened after your childhood and more in your adult life?
So after my near-death experience, I went through, I share this in my book, it's called Love's Miracles and Misery. And so there's other experiences I had with the divine, and it built a relationship to where in my adult life, I found, I'll just say I'm a walking miracle. So in 2015, I had just come off a very long and very hard modeling and singing career, and I needed a place to just rest. And so I found myself in Fort Worth, Texas. And I remember I was getting ready to go out with my roommates that night, and I was buttoning up the front clasp of my bra, and my left fingertip brushed something hard. And immediately, because it was in the very inner curve of my breast tissue, and I remember this thoughts just raced through my head, and I quickly put them aside because I was like, I'm only 32, I don't have to worry about this, blah, blah, blah. Well, the next year, 2016, I got a phone call from my estranged mother that no one wants to get. And she told me that she had the same cancer that killed her mother at her age, and that I was to get tested as well, because she not only had confirmed ovarian cancer, but she had the BRCA2 gene mutation that gives you like a 70 to 80% chance of getting all of the killer cancers, which are the estrogen-based cancers, the breast cancer, the ovarian cancer, by the time you're 70. And after that, it's like basically imminent. And so I, of course, put it off. I was in denial. And until the fall of that same year in 2016, my father called and told me, my estranged father called and told me that he had not only one but two kinds of cancer, and one of them melanoma that killed his sister as well, and his father died of cancer as well. So not only am I facing both parents with cancer, I could also have the gene mutation. And so I think it took until the very early spring of 2017, and my friends had an intervention. They finally said, you have got to get tested, because I was just starting to spiral. And so the test results came back, and I also had the genetic marker, or the gene mutation that gives you the cancer, even at my age, so at 32. And so I was again forced by my friends to go in a week before my 33rd birthday into a cancer clinic. And I remember sitting in that room, and I was answering questions to an assistant, and to put into perspective where I was at the time. And I speak about having a relationship with the divine and having a very tangible relationship. With that tangible relationship comes, I'm not without very strong emotional times, because some people have actually asked, well, why, if you had this relationship with the divine, like you had all this faith, why were you afraid? I was like, I was terrified. Like, I have actual lumps that I can feel in my body. Both my parents have cancer, and it doesn't, like, because I have faith doesn't mean I won't walk through a particular life path that looks very scary. And so I was in that room, and I was just it was as if my emotional state of being the anxiety and the worry was creeping on to terror. And I just didn't want to answer these questions anymore because she kept asking about my family history, how many times how many people have had cancer, how many people have died from cancer, and all of these things. And it just keeps getting worse, keeps building until finally this nurse comes in and she lays me back on the table and starts the examination. And she was absolutely divine. She was this short, plump little lady, and she was like 9 months pregnant. Like literally the seams of her like scrubs were the only thing keeping that baby in. She was just the sweetest, she's beaming, absolutely beautiful. And she was trying her best to kind of keep me calm because she could just tell, like anyone within a 15 feet knew I was just palpably just not okay. And so she starts the examination and she's like asking me questions and whatnot. And she's about halfway through and she hits this spot on the left side of my inner cleavage. And I grabbed both of her hands. My hand shot up and I know I grabbed her too hard and I snapped at her and I said, ouch, that hurts. Don't do that again. And she said nothing to me, looked at the assistant. The assistant just leaves without a word and she wiggles her hands free and she folds me back up and puts both of her hands on my upper thigh and says, where are you from again? And I mean, as I'm calculating everything that happened, I had very little time because a very tall, thin, mechanical doctor comes whirling into this room. And she comes around the table, introduces herself, like literally like shimmies the nurse out from the left side of the table and scoots in and starts the examination herself. And so, but I notice, I could not help but notice this nurse. I was so irritated the entire time. I was like, I just need to get over this. But she went around the table. The nurse came as close as she possibly could to my right side and never left she never left my side. She just kept staring at me. And I remember it was so odd that like the doctor was like looking over her glasses at the nurse and like opened up, like kind of like flipped up the paper gown and like started her examination, and she was unrelenting. Like it was really hard and it was really uncomfortable and I was already on edge. And then the confusion of everything, it literally went from like terror to just rage. I was so mad. And every time that doctor touched me, I just kept getting like closer and closer to snapping at this woman. And, I was kind of holding it together until she hit that same spot that nurse did. And I tried my best to like move her hands up off of me, the doctor's hands, and they were just solid, firm. And I remember just snapping at this doctor. I said, ouch, that hurts. Do not do that again. And she looked at me, did not lose eye contact, and she pushed harder and firmer around something that felt like a screwdriver was drilling into my rib cage. And it hurt so badly. And I remember clenching my teeth and just staring at the ceiling. And I was so mad I couldn't even cry, Lily. I was just so upset. And so it took everything I had just to focus on not swinging on this woman. And she finished the examination. She found something else on the left side. And I remember everything going hazy after the measurements were taken and everything was relayed to the assistant. But I remember what happened was the moment that she said bilateral breast cancer, I was done. She had an entire conversation. I didn't even know I couldn't even comprehend it. And she had, before I left, she had chemo, radiation, a bilateral mastectomy. And, I could not get in because it was a Thursday and I could not get in for the emergency biopsy to take out the lumps and to see what stage the cancer was in, until Monday. And so, I remember just lying on that table and the doctor and the assistant left. And the only reason I knew anyone was in that room again was because I heard a distant rumbling through like a drawer or whatever from someone, and that nurse popped back into my vision and kind of shook me out of my haze. And she said, I want to show you something. And I said, okay. And she had this false breast, and she put it on my solar plexus. She said, give me your hands. And she placed it on my fingertips together, and she placed it on the false breast with hers on top, and she pressed down. And I felt this like pea-sized or larger misshapen lumps, like those mud dauber nests that you see, like those misshapen little lumps. And she said, these are the lumps they find, they take out, they send off, and almost always come back as benign. And she took a moment, and she took a visible breath, and she turned that false breast, and she put my fingertips together again, placed it on the false breast, hers on top, and then she pressed down again. And I immediately recoiled because it hurt. It was like a pinky sized lump made of steel ground to a point, and it hurt to the touch. Like it actually like hurt. And I didn't say anything, but I think I gave her a look basically. And she said, these are the lumps that we find, we take out, and we send off, and almost always come back as breast cancer. And it was like watching in slow motion and not being able to look away. She took both of my hands, lifted my gown, placed both of my hands on that lump on the left inner corner of my cleavage, and she pressed down. And when I say it hurt like the same lump I had just felt that was the size of my digit, the pinky digit, ground to a point. And it didn't just hurt to my fingertips. It hurt into my bones and my marrow and my soul and my spirit. And it spoke a truth that I knew she was trying to get me to understand. And I just broke. I just wept on that table. And that sweet woman covered me back up and stayed by my side and let me just cry. And she let me finish, and she left the room. I got dressed, and she walked me all the way to the door, and she gave me a hug, and she said, honey, it's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. And that was a Thursday. And as I said, I had Friday, Saturday, Sunday to get my affairs in order. So that Friday, I'd finally called my friends who kept encouraging me to get the tests done and whatnot. And they were two fellows like brothers to me. Invited them over, and I told them everything. I told them about my family history, about the breast cancer they found, and what I was going to need for help and whatnot. And I remember they looked at me with a visual patience until I was done. And they said, Cara, thank you so much for sharing that with me. But you're not going to need any of that, because we're going to lay hands on you and pray, and we're going to heal you. Right now, I spoke about how I came from a religious background, like a Christian background. And in that background, I'd been to a couple tent revivals, like where people I still know to this day were prayed over and are still in wheelchairs. And so I just knew that I'd had experience before, and it's not like I didn't believe that it, could happen. I just had never known it before, and was just that was not a staple in my faith. But I didn't want to reject them or their love, and so I let them, and they laid hands on me and prayed, and it was a beautiful experience. Like I never felt. I mean, I felt closer to them than I ever had, and it was wonderful of them to do, but I just didn't feel anything. And so I said goodbye to them that night, and then the next day, it was Saturday, and from the very beginning of the day, I got on the phone with everyone I knew. I needed help to and from the appointments, food. I needed to help trying to figure out how to pay for all this stuff. And so I remember I was so consumed with that. It wasn't until like the end of the day I realized that it was dark outside. And so I ended up I was dog sitting at the time. And so I biked from my apartment across Fort Worth to this beautiful house. And it was my favorite. They had 3 amazing dogs and they were my favorite family. And I was so, I was looked forward to being there. And I will say this to the day that I am no longer on this planet. I believe animals know. I believe they know, they have an intelligence and they know things far greater than we give them credit for. Because as I parked my bike and walked up the steps to the front door, I opened it, and those the normally very like energetic, yappy dogs never said anything. They just literally sat there at the door waiting for me. And I came in and I shut the door, and the only thing I heard was the pat of my bare feet and the click of their nails as I walked all the way down and around to the guest room of that house that I was staying at. And 2 of the dogs went in and laid on the floor where they usually did, and one of them took her place on the bed. And I remember looking at that bed, even though it was like 8, maybe 9 o'clock, definitely past sunrise. I just couldn't imagine sleeping. And so I remember I went to the edge of the bed, the end of the bed, and I looked out the floor to ceiling wall window. Like, it was just absolutely beautiful. And I looked out at the black and dark blue shadows of the foliage. And because it was a full moon, and there was a beautiful pool, and the moonlight danced on the water, and it usually gave me so much peace, but I just could not, I just stared out almost as if nothing. And I was there in that silence for I don't know how long, just there. And that was until that silence turned into a stillness. The only way I can describe it is so when I was a kid, I told you that I would go inside when I really needed help, and I would either go outside in nature or be in my room alone, and I would cry, or I would sit there, or I would speak to the moon or whatever, but I would just be in stillness until that. It's like as if the atmosphere of the room shifts, and I could settle into that space within, and it became so palpable. Like the energy filled the room, and I could just ask questions and find answers there no matter what. It was like a safe space, right? And so in that room on that Saturday, I remember that happening again. And to be honest, it hadn't happened in a long time because I guess I just hadn't needed it. But I remember thinking about my situation. I remember taking in like my grandmother and my grandfather and my aunt and my parents' situation and all of the things they had to do, like the chemo, the radiation, the surgeries and things. And I took in that path that they had to take, right? Or they chose to take. And I said, I took in my entire life, and I came to the decision that I was not going to do the surgeries. I wasn't going to do the treatments, whatever they found. I was just going to let it do what it needs to do, because I had lived a beautiful life. I had this beautiful relationship with the divine, and I knew that I had what very few people had, and I was okay with that. Although it wasn't joy I found, it was just contentment. I said that was okay. I was going to be all right with that. And so in that stillness, I sat with that for a little bit, and then something inside of me started to build. And I couldn't describe it. It was like this feeling, this indescribable, voiceless feeling, like something needed to be like worked out. And I was like, okay, well, what is this? Like, what's happening? And ended up going from like wordless, like, okay, like what's going on, to like, okay, what is this? Like what's happening? And so I remember like went back to like speaking to like love, like I'm speaking to you. I'm like, what is this? Like what's happening? And it was like, it built to a fever pitch where I knew I needed something. I knew I needed to figure something else. I knew I needed to like, I just couldn't figure out what question to ask or what was going on. I said, listen, like, what is this? Like, it feels as if I need to ask for something else. I need to find another way. There's something else out there. I just don't know what else to do. And so, I basically started just screaming at the divine like David did, like, listen, if there's something else I need to know, if there's another way through this, if I need to do something else, I need you to tell me what to do. Cause I just don't literally I have no idea what else to do. Like I see where my parents and my family came from. And I know my brothers had just like walked me through this, like this experience, and nothing happened. And so I'm like, if there's something else, you have got to show up. You've got to be tangible. You have got to tell me what to do. And just then, like 2 Bible verses dropped into my understanding. Now, at this time, I had already started to deconstruct from like Christianity. So I had kind of thrown the baby out with the bathwater, and I was like not okay with like anything that had to do with like Christianity at all. But the 2 Bible verses that dropped into my soul, the first one was faith like a child, which again, like we were talking about before, that was something I clung to because it allowed me to have this relationship. I without the religious leading or anything to have to do with the Bible, that made sense to me because I was living that Bible verse, right? I was living it. And so I was like, okay, I accept that. That's wisdom I can accept. But the second Bible verse was the stories of when people who were too poor, or in poverty, that were really, really sick and couldn't afford help, they would go before people in the church and have them lay hands on them and they would be healed. And I remember like stopping and being like, okay, I heard you wrong. I know I heard you wrong. So we're going to try this again. And I literally like sat there with like the essence of like, almost like with a pen and pad, like, okay, let's just, what is it? Like, what else I'll do it. I just tell me what to do. And, sure enough, like I waited there for a long time and it never shook. Like that assurance, the knowing I knew I needed to do that stayed there. And so the next morning I woke up, I called my brothers and I said, listen, I'm going to your church. Now, I had been to this church a couple of times before and it was made very clear, very quickly that I just wasn't welcome. And here's why, just to preface, and no shame. I'm just saying that this was my experience. I found that in some of their teaching, I could not connect with it. And here's why. They said things as it like, they said that no one could have the power, specifically the power of God or the Holy Spirit or what I would call love, specifically in like miracles or, let's say a deep relationship, doing wonders and whatnot, or like leading, unless that power was given to the individual through them because they were apostles and they were divine by God. And I was like, excuse me. I know for a fact that's not true. Like, and I tried to explain to them, and then I even used like Bible verses or whatnot, and they just made it very clear I wasn't welcome. So, anyhow, and so you can imagine their absolute shock when I show up, right? The next day, and I walked straight up to the pastor wife, and she's saucy herself, and so saucy and saucy me. And so I said, listen, ma'am, I was told by what you call God and what I call love that I'm supposed to come here and have people lay hands on me and pray because I have bilateral breast cancer. And she looks at me and she like tentatively agrees after like just kind of taking it in a little bit, right? And so I'm on the front pew of this church. It was a charismatic church, right? And by the way, I'm like, this is a Spanish speaking church. This is a Spanish speaking, I'm the only white person there, like kind of stuff. And I loved it, but like, hey, got a sore thumb thing. And so worship started, and about halfway through the first song, the pastor wife and all of like her elders, who have been anointed by her, apparently have all the power in the world, come over and they lay hands on her or me, and they start, some were praying, some were speaking in tongues, some were singing, and then I'm fairly certain a couple people were trying to exorcise me. And so I remember just kind of like, I had no energy left. I was really just drained. And I remember hanging my head and in my seated position. And I remember they were there for like songs. And I remember the longer they were there, the harder I just cried because nothing was happening. And eventually they like left me there just weeping. And I remember there were two hands on me, one my friend Chris, and then another one. It was a very small one on the very left side of my middle back. And I remember going into that space within me. I call it my dwelling place, the dwelling place of love, but my dwelling place. And I remember through tears, I remember saying out loud, I said, I still know you're good. You have shown and proven yourself too many times through love that you are not real, but I still know you're good, even though this didn't work. And I know the path I'm going to take. I knew that I wasn't going to take those tests. I knew I wasn't going to go through the treatments. I knew that. And so I just gathered everything I had and I said to love, I said, so no matter what your will is, I accept. And the moment I accept left my lips, like a palm width beam of power came from that small hand on the left side of my back, beelined through my torso, split, hovered on both breast lumps, and stayed there for songs. And I remember it was so overwhelming that just the world just fell away. And I remember with my mind's eye, I could see, like I could feel it. Obviously, it was like pulsing. It was like this solid beam of just power, and it was pulsing like a heartbeat. And it was like white. And so I remember just kind of watching that. And after a while, it dissipated into me. It didn't disappear. It dissipated into me, and it wasn't quick, like some people have kind of described. And so, as I was kind of coming back to what I would call a consciousness, I remember realizing my mouth was like moving, and I didn't know what it was saying. And so finally, when I kind of came to, I opened my eyes and I realized I kept repeating, I accept this, I accept this, I accept this, just subconsciously, and as I took in the room, this second wave of shock overcame me, because like the music was still going, they were still singing, everyone was still speaking in tongues and doing their own thing, even the people with their hands on me, and no one knew what happened. Nobody but me. And so I'm just in like awe. So I take a moment and realize all of that. And I reached over with my right hand, took that hand, and I pulled them around to sit next to me on the pew. And it was a 13-year-old girl. And I remember just looking at her, and she must have thought I was a crazy woman, because I was like, oh my gosh. And it hit me that her faith like a child hit my faith like a child, and a miracle happened. And I was absolutely, I knew I was changed from that moment on. And I remember looking at her and saying, because I knew what would happen. I knew people would try to like say something. It wasn't her, it was somebody else, blah, blah, blah. So I remember seeing her and seeing myself in her, like struggling for faith and trust and whatnot. And I remember saying to her, listen, love, I'm going to tell you something that may be hard for you to believe or understand. But I believe that what I would call love, and what they, pointing at the leaders in the church, would call God, chose you to heal me of cancer this morning because you had faith. And I want you to understand that that is how powerful you and love are together. And I want you to never forget that. So, the next day, because that was Sunday, right? Yeah. The next day was, I was there bright and early because I had a 3D mammogram, an ultrasound, and a lumpectomy scheduled, right? And so the 3D mammogram is something that's state of the art. Like it can see the smallest speck of cancer, and that's why they do it, right? And then they do an ultrasound just to make sure they got everything, and then they can do the lumpectomy, find everything take it out and send it off. Right. And so I remember walking into the mammogram room and, with like a paper gown, and, this woman was in the back, and you could tell like, she had a chart in her hand. She kept flipping through it, like, and then she was looking at something on the desk, and she kept rummaging through things. And she, was so just entranced with this, like I had to kind of like clear my throat to kind of get her attention. And so she like looks up over her glasses and she said, "Oh, welcome in. Where are your lumps?" And I was like, "What?" Because in the original, when they found them, there were like measurements. They said they measured from certain places, and like the breast lump that I felt was so far out of my breast tissue, like I could feel it, like it was so tangible. And so, like, I think the shock just kind of took the words from me, because I was like, well, that was like here and here, and I think there should be measurements and like I was just basically barbling her. And so she got irritated, and she like snapped the chart closed and said, "We're just going to scan everything." And I was like, "Oh, well, that's a good idea." And so she did. And I remember leaving the room. It was like maybe 7 minutes in between. And, they called me back to the ultrasound, right? And so again, I walk into this room, paper gown. There was an ultrasound machine between me and this gal in the back. And she, again, she was obsessed with something. So she had a chart in her hand. She kept looking at this through it. And then she'd look at the screen and she'd like zoom in. And then she'd zoom out, and then she'd like look back and forth on like a picture, right? And she was so entranced with that, I had to clear my throat again. And she like leans around the ultrasound machine and she's like, "Oh, welcome in. Where are your breast lumps?" And I had time, and I regret this to this day a little bit, because I had time to kind of like gather myself. And if I'm the person, I'm like 7th of 8 children. So like I get super literal when things aren't going right. Like I need things to be done right. And so if I think that you are putting me or someone else in danger, or like your incompetence is like messing stuff up, I get super literal. And so I looked at her, poor thing, and I said, "Listen, you have one job. You need to find those breast lumps, because I just went through a 3D mammogram, which I know you can find. And I came in here with a chart and they measured me. So I'm going to need you to do your job and find those lumps yourself, because I can't do it for you." And she looks at me like, and she like snaps the chart closed. I don't know if this is a normal thing for nurses, but she snapped it closed and she's like, "We're going to scan everything then." And I was like, "Well, that's probably a good idea." And so she did. And she was definitely thorough, and a bit rougher than I think she should have been, but that's fine. I deserved it. And so she leaves the room, and when she did, she said, "The doctor will be in a few minutes to finalize everything," which means he was going to cut me open. First, he was going to shoot me with this like little numbing agent. He was going to cut me open and take out those breast lumps and send them off, basically. And so I was trying to prepare myself for that, because I was still nervous. So each and every time I went in there, this experience allowed me to know what it's like to have an actual dichotomy, in like a duality inside, to know something happened that day on Sunday, but also know the reality of what could happen and what I know to be possible, because my family's history and my faith, right? And so, with all of that going on, I'm like trying to keep myself together. And this short, silver-haired doctor flies into the room, introduces himself, says, "Hello, Miss Cara." And before I can say anything, he walks over, pats my left knee and says, "Thank you for coming in, miss. We'll see you when you're 40. Turns around and tries to leave the room. And Lily, I lose my mind. I jump out of my seat, like drapes open. I stop him, I spin him around, and I shake him by the shoulders, and I say, "Listen, something has happened. You have done something wrong. You've lost these breast lumps. You're going to find them. You're going to take them out, and you're going to tell me I don't have breast cancer." And this poor man, he just kind of like looks at me, and he like wiggles out, he like kind of like wiggles out of it, and he like replaces his hands on my shoulders, and he kind of has to like, because I'm taller, so he kind of has to like look up and whatnot, and he kind of shakes me a little bit, and he was like, "Ma'am, I have no idea what you're talking about. We have done every single test that we need to. This is state of the art stuff. Like, this is a 3D mammogram and ultrasound. And if there was anything in there, we would have found it. Ma'am, there's nothing to find. And he leaves the room. And I remember staring at where he was for I don't know how long, until like my legs give out and I stumble back and I sit down hard on the ultrasound table. And I remember my hands like visually like shaking, because in my head I was like, I felt these lumps. I know what this is. The nurse was with me. Like, she was there. And so I remember lifting that gown and placing my like trembling hands where those lump was, because the terror and the unknown just completely takes over. And I remember pressing down, and Lily, a pinky width divot in my rib cage and a bruised sensation was the only proof anything was ever there. And I remember just staying there for a moment, just unable to even breathe, because I never thought, it never crossed my mind that love would have just dissolved death within me, like just taken it away without no doubt, undeniable proof. And from that day on, like, I was never the same. Like, my faith, you can't question. I thought you couldn't question my faith before. You can't question my faith now. There's no way. It is unshakable. Like, when they say, I'll go back to the wisdom that I found in the Bible that was true. The truth is that when you have the foundation, like the solid foundation of faith in general, faith in the power of love that holds this entire universe together, that is bound and created in the very essence of love, that faith in that is unshakable. Like, I was never the same after that. And so that's when I started like just telling everybody about it. And I just couldn't help it. Right.
And that reminds me of, I believe you talked about this in your book, of a moment when you were younger, and you had fallen down stairs, and
yes,
you broke your back, and you were healed from that. And once you were healed, the only thing left over from that moment was this dull, bruise-like feeling.
Yeah.
And that same feeling that you felt in that moment was left over from whenever you were healed from your cancer. And I just think that's such a beautiful parallel between two moments where love healed you.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I thank you. I'm so grateful thank you for reading my book, and thank you for bringing that up, because like it's true. And it goes to the point where we in the Christian faith, specifically the Christian religion, it's not a faith, it's a religion, or any religion at all, that says you have to earn, or you have to know, or you have to do to have the power or the full access to love itself. I knew nothing as a child. That was just following what was inside, trusting that voice and that love. And that's why I'm just so grateful that I'm in a position where I can share my story and then help people get to the point, like through my coaching and things like that, or just conversations like this, which I'm so grateful to have a platform. Lily, thank you so much for being one of like the many wonderful, beautiful souls that are giving us platforms to speak and share these stories to like help change our lives, because I feel like people need to know about this. But yeah, at 8 years old, I probably was around 9 then, but that was just fueled by faith, man. Just allowing it to teach you to lead and to see those miracles and magic.
And you wrote a book called Love's Miracles in the Misery.
Yeah.
And why did you choose to write that book? And if there is one thing that you would want someone who reads the book, if there's one thing that you want someone to get from that what would that be?
Thank you for asking that. And that was so well worded. So, if I wanted people to get one thing, from my book or my story in general is to challenge what the world says is possible through the power within. That's what I'm hoping everyone understands and gets, because I have found in my life, through tangible, miraculous, and unbelievable, misery, like actual misery in this world. That's why I wrote the book the way I did. I didn't want to hold back the human element, because a lot of times people take that out and it's not a real depiction of what faith or love or our journey is. And so, I want people to understand they have everything they need inside. You are the essence of love itself, inseparably, right? Like what you would call God, the Holy Spirit, and love or divinity. You are so tangibly connected to that, and an absolute representation that we are meant to live differently than we are taught to. So if we can challenge what the world says is possible, or our conditioning, we can live a life of true freedom. We can live a life that we actually want. We can, what people call, manifest or live in that power, and just see what people would call miracles and magic, and then understand and know that's how we're supposed to be living. So it's not necessarily like a miracle. It's not like magical. That's just like how we can live. So I'm hoping that people can see and connect with both the misery and the magic, and come out of it knowing that they can let go of all of that, realize who they are, and then live this life of absolute freedom now, like love now, like peace now. Hopefully.
Yeah. Have heaven here now.
Bring heaven down.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Cara, this conversation has been so wonderful to me. Your story has resonated with me so much, and I know that it will resonate with the people listening. And I'm just so thankful that you are sharing your story. Your story needs to be heard.
Oh, thank you so much. And again, thank you for giving us a platform to share it, because I think it's time. I think you're right. I think people are ready to hear it. They're and I couldn't be more grateful for you, Lily. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.